Excellent. Thank you all for coming. Just waiting for the appropriate time to hit so we can start the live stream. So, not that you all are not important here in the real world, but we have to take care of our friends over the ether. Just by way of hands, how many people here know what the United Front Work Department is? About half? Okay. Oh, I thought that was the girl, the girl with Cuban ancestry telling me that she knew what the United Front Work Department was. Okay. Well, thank you. If we're ready to go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining this important panel. My name is Chuck DeVore. I'm the Chief National Initiatives Officer for the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And I think this is one of our more interesting panels. Not that, all panels are created equal, right? But some are perhaps more equal than others. And so in this case, the United Front, exposing China's strategic U.S. land grab, that's kind of the news hook, right? So we're going to touch on that, but that's only a portion of, I think, what we'll talk about today. It's a very, very expansive topic, and as fate would have it, the bill that we're talking about was scheduled to be heard this morning in the House, and now I think it's been delayed until Monday. So let me please start by introducing our august panel. Seated immediately to my left is Ambassador Kelly Curry. She is a non-resident senior fellow with the Atlantic Council. And it may be hard to believe, but throughout her 3-decade career in foreign policy, she specialized in human rights and non-traditional national security issues with a focus on the Indo-Pacific region. She was unanimously confirmed in July 2017 as the U.S. representative to the UN Economic and Social Council and alternative representative to the UN General Assembly under Ambassador Nikki Haley. I'll let you do the math to figure out when she was confirmed to know who she was nominated by. Sitting next to her is Jacqueline Deal. She's the non-resident senior fellow for the Asia program with the Foreign Policy Research Institute. She's also the co-founder of the American Academy for Strategic Education, a nonprofit focused on educating policy professionals, and she's also the president and CEO of the Long-Term Strategy Group, a DC-based defense consultancy. Michael Lucci, next in line, is the founder and CEO of State Armor. He created State Armor to develop and enact state solutions to global security threats. Of course, probably 95% of that global security threat would be the People's Republic of China. In his work, he synthesizes a unique understanding of global affairs with deep experience in state policymaking, working at both the state and federal, with both state and federal leaders to achieve State Armor's mission. And finally on the panel, certainly but not least, we have Jimmy Quinn. He's the national security correspondent for the National Review. From 2023 to 2024, he was the Robert Novak Fellow with the Fund for American Studies. He's also a former William F. Buckley Jr. Fellow in Political Journalism at the National Review Institute. And so with that, I thought it would be really interesting to start with a very short video, so don't let your attention drift. This video is of recent action in your Texas legislature, in the Senate, and it encapsulates, I think, very poignantly some of the challenge that we're up against with the United Front Work Department. So if we could please roll the video, I'd appreciate it. And this will be my first time seeing it, so I'm kind of excited.
One voice in Austin can speak for many.
It's not hundreds, thousands, it's millions.
It's why Zheng Gangcheng made several trips from Dallas to oppose bills he believes are harmful to Asians in Texas.
It's damaging and dangerous.
He testified against 5 bills. All of them, he says, are racist.
In this way, HB 17 is racist in nature, I think. Thus, each and everyone supporting this bill, to me, is racist in heart and mind. the regulation in China is different because in China, even me, I own green card. I'm a Chinese citizen. Even I cannot buy land. All the time that the witnesses are saying it, I don't know, they seems to be targeting China or, accusing CCP or China doing things. I think it's irrelevant. They spend so much money coming to the U.S.
Well, okay, but let me go one step further. So we were there, and we could have this hearing, and we criticize the Chinese government. Are we going to be allowed to?
I think that I'm not sure, but on the website, there are so many things. Like people are protesting or against. There are so many things that the Chinese government has so many things to do. They don't care unless you try to destabilize the government or cause social unrest. When you visit, you are welcomed, especially from the United States, and you don't need to get a visa.
Well, I think that the government of the United States thinks differently. That's why they have designated China as a foreign adversary. And so that is why.
You need to go for yourself. And now there's opportunity for you to go without visa. You can just drop there and you have probably 10 days to visit and see. Thank you so much, Chairman.
Further, this bill specifically targets the Asian community. In the past years, there has already been a surge in hate crimes and incidents against the people of Asian heritage. Just like in Midland, Texas, an Asian family was knifed in Sam's Club simply because of the color of their skin. Texas ranks fourth in anti-Asian incidents. If this bill passes, there will be more hate crimes and incidents against Asian grandmas and grandpas, and their blood will be on your hands.
Thank you for your excellent leadership of this important committee. My name is Chuck DeVore. I'm with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and I'm here to testify in support of SB 17. I was listening carefully to the testimony of many of the individuals who came before me, and I was struck by the similarity in the arguments of much of that testimony. And further, that the arguments actually did not respond at all to the bill. They were talking about how they would, for example, be prevented from purchasing residential real estate. Well, the bill doesn't address residential real estate. It doesn't affect residential real estate. It also doesn't affect citizens or individuals who are lawful permanent residents. So there was a lot of misperception that I heard in the testimony, and I thought it sounded a little familiar. So I looked back and I found a statement. I want to read it, Mr. Chairman. It goes as follows: commercial interactions between China and the U.S. benefit both sides. To politicize trade and investment is at odds with market economy principles and undercuts people's confidence in the U.S. market. Such restrictions may also fuel Asian hatred in the U.S. and racial discrimination, thus running counter to American values. Mr. Chairman, that statement was from the Embassy of the People's Republic of China in an article in the Washington Post in August of 2023. I was wearing the same suit and tie that I was wearing that day, I might have had a different choice as I walked in my my closet this morning. But other than that brief, modest embarrassment, that, ladies and gentlemen, is an interesting example. Now, in the interest of time, we couldn't go on, but what we saw in the testimony on SB 17, which is a bill that seeks to restrict the sale of things like ranches and farmland and large like food processing facilities to entities based in China. That's what the bill is about. And then you heard approximately 30 people, of whom about 27 were either naturalized citizens or people here on green cards from China, testify against the bill with remarkably similar talking points, all touching upon the fact that this bill was somehow racist. And that's why I went back and found the statement that I did from the Chinese embassy. I did that by the way, about 15 minutes earlier, because I'm listening to the testimony, I'm thinking, wait a minute here, these guys all have the same script. So let me just ask the basic question and go down the line. How does this thing happen? Because I'm a former lawmaker from California. I don't recall seeing this sort of activity during the time that I had in the legislature, where you had such clearly obvious coordination, in this case from a foreign power. What's going on here?
Well, I don't know. You couldn't really see my face during some of those testimonies, but I was apparently pulling some very interesting faces while the gentleman was testifying. But what I think is going on, and I leave it to my counterparts on the panel here also who have more expertise in this than I do. But since 2013, since Xi Jinping came to power as the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party in 2013, we have seen a dramatic upturn in how the United Front operates, not just here in the United States, but globally, and a much more aggressive, much more comprehensive, much more well-financed, well-resourced, and coordinated effort to shape what the CCP sees as the battle space. And this is part of a comprehensive political warfare plan that the CCP is employing. It is part of their geopolitical toolkit. They refer to the United Front as one of the magic weapons that the party has at its disposal to achieve its political goals. And this is all downstream of that fundamental shift that started in 2013 under Xi. And so when you were in the state legislature in California, this was happening. It was just happening at a different scale and scope. And it was much less aggressive and much less forefronted in the way that it is now. And so I think that it didn't mean that it wasn't happening. It was just more loosely coordinated and much less resourced than it is today.
Just to build on that, thank you for the question, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be here at TPPF. The United Front, just to go back historically, as you all know, is a kind of Leninist concept, and it was picked up by the early Chinese communists when the Chinese Communist Party was founded just over 100 years ago. And it was the tool by which the party strengthened itself so that it was later able to win the Chinese Civil War. And it refers to, in the first instance, the United Front that was formed between the Chinese Communist Party. They joined with the Nationalist Party, which was the other revolutionary party on the ground in China in the 1920s. And they formed a kind of alliance, except the terms of entry, it was supposed to be that the Chinese communists gave up their Communist Party membership because the nationalists were much stronger, and they were supposed to join the Nationalist Party. They secretly retained their Chinese Communist Party allegiance and worked within the Nationalist Party to siphon off, to draw off the Nationalist Party's strength. So a key early Chinese Communist Party leader was Zhou Enlai, who you may have heard of. He was, we think of him as the man on Mao Zedong's right. He was positioned within the Nationalist Military Academy, and he was recruiting nationalist cadets, students from their military, to become secret communists, and that's the origin of the PLA. So Mao, the first chairman, the first leader of the People's Republic of China after the end of the Civil War, as Kelly said, he, in 1939, wrote an essay where he said, we have three magic weapons, and the first is the United Front, the second is our army, the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, as it became, and the third is the party itself and the organization and the discipline of the party. But number one was the United Front because it was the tool by which the party strengthened itself at the expense of its opponent. So when Xi Jinping came to power a little over a decade ago, as Kelly said, he revived or revitalized the United Front, which was, it has a bureaucratic component in the party state, but he said, United Front operations are the work of all Chinese Communist Party members. So it doesn't really matter whether you're in the government or you're out or you're serving the state officially or not. You have to perform United Front work, which involves taking the resources, befriending, co-opting, if necessary, coercing parties who are not in the CCP, gaining strength from their resources. And so it's building friends, but friends in quotes, people whose resources you can use, and then pulling over the neutrals. And again, this goes back to Lenin, and then suppressing neutralizing adversaries, people who are skeptical of the CCP. And I think another thing that's changed is technology, because I remember being in that hearing at the HB 17. It was a marathon day where there were actually 11 bills, as I recall, about China. And the team from State Armor showed up, and we each had, 4 to 6 bills we were going to testify on, and we had prepared. And the man who was in most of the footage, he said, when the first bill came up, which was not the land bill, HB 17, he said, I'm here to testify on HB 17, but I'm going to testify on this bill. I can't remember which one it was because I find it important. He then proceeded to testify on 8 of the next 11 bills. And he had his phone with him. So maybe he was getting cues, it's not clear, or prompts.
Actually, I could see his phone. Sometimes he was definitely getting prompts and getting information.
So something was happening that was potentially tech-enabled, and it was, a sight to behold, frankly, as he, as you pointed out, mimicked Chinese Communist Party talking points at this hearing of the Texas legislature just a few weeks ago.
And if I can add to that, because I could at times see what he was doing, he was actually reading off of the Twitter feeds of the Chinese embassy here in the United States, the Chinese mission to the United Nations, and other Twitter feeds of Chinese party state entities that he's reading off of. I was cutting over
in the Texas legislature,
sitting there in the committee hearing room, reading their Twitter feed as part of his. And I recognized the content because I track those things. That's what he was doing, and I could see also off his phone that's what he was doing. It was really, I'd forgotten about that until you just mentioned it.
This is actually captured in a photo that's featured in a Wall Street Journal article where he's looking at his phone, getting talking points off of that. The activity in Texas in 2023 and again now in 2025 has been focused on the land bill. And there's a lot we could say about that. But what was interesting was they had people come in and testify against a bill or criticize a bill to just protect Texan DNA from a Chinese military company that's building bioweapons. They testified against a bill to criminalize and crush what's called transnational repression, which is occurring in the state of Texas, where party state actors go after Chinese diaspora community to get them to be quiet when they criticize the leader of China. So, and they now have a webpage with all their talking points about all this. What I actually think about this situation is, and I think many of you in the crowd probably see Texas in the same way, I see Texas as the decisive American state of the 21st century. And you see that shift occurring between California and Texas. You see Texas becoming the center of a lot of economic power, a lot of cultural power in the United States. The inflows of people, I'm one of those people, Chuck's one of those people who came into this state because there's amazing, miraculous things happening here. I think they don't want Texas to get out of their orbit. They've really locked in influence operations in California, in New York, in all these other places, and they want to be able to get their claws into Texas before Texas breaks free of that orbit. I will say that the leadership here in Texas is peerless compared to other states on these particular issues, other issues as well. But what you've seen with the governor, what you've seen with the legislative leaders, the committee leaders, we operate in a lot of states. There's nothing like what's happening in Texas this year to counter the Chinese Communist Party in a very broad way. I mean, we're talking about dozens of bills that address unique problems that are setting a new national standard.
So Jimmy, you cover the country. So give us a kind of a national perspective as far as, is this really a thing, or are we being overly sensitive here in Texas?
Yeah, I mean, it's more than a thing. It's a violation of America's national sovereignty. It's interference in our elections and our political processes. There are people working in government offices at all levels of government who have some sort of ties to the Chinese party state and to United Front related entities and espionage arms of the CCP and the PRC. But what's happening now and why this is such a big issue in Texas is that, like Michael said, they're being challenged for the first time. Ambassador Curry pointed out that Xi Jinping started to really ramp up United Front work once he started to take power in China. But I think there's been a massive sea change specifically in the previous 3 years as people have woken up to this threat. During the Trump administration, there was a lot of conversation about it. There was more media coverage. that the State Department did quite a bit, the National Security Council. But then in 2022, there was a nonprofit group that revealed the existence of a Chinese police station in New York, operated by one of the branches of the Ministry of Public Security out of Fujian province. And that's when media and nonprofits and government offices at the federal level really started to dig into this and start asking, what is the apparatus, what is the ecosystem that allowed for a Chinese police station to open up in Chinatown, downtown Manhattan? And so, there's a lot more attention paid to this. Former Representative Mike Gallagher went out and had a rally with Chinese human rights dissidents right in front of the outpost. The DOJ brought a case. And what we learned is that the police station was the nexus of all of this United Front activity. The Ministry of Public Security worked with the consulate in New York via United Front networks, via this United Front organization that had ties to a local community organization. And that local community organization had ties to New York City politicians like Mayor Eric Adams. Senator Chuck Schumer attended some of the banquets of this nonprofit group as well. So what they've basically been able to do is create this network where various party state entities are able to plug into our political scene and try to persuade people that way. And it's all very concerning, and this is just the start of a broader turning point here.
Madam Ambassador, you had a
I do,
observation?
Because what Jimmy is talking about, the NGO that discovered that Chinese secret police station in New York, they did that because it's actually a European NGO called Safeguard Defenders. The woman who wrote the report identifying that police station is a very good friend and colleague of mine. And she initially discovered that police station because she was doing research in Europe and found a network of similar police stations all across Europe that were doing the same thing to target. She's a human rights lawyer like me by training, and she was looking at issues of transnational repression of ethnic Chinese communities, Tibetans, Uyghurs, Hong Kongers in Europe, and started to notice this pattern across the European continent of these nexuses. What is the plural of nexus? It's not nexi, that would not be right, but anyway, these networks of organizations that then formed these security entities, these nodes all over Europe, and then found the same thing in New York City. And so, and I will add that the work that she was doing on transnational repression was funded by the United States government. It was funded as a research grant from the State Department to look into this kind of transnational repression issue from the department's Bureau of Human Rights and Labor. And this is, so the kinds of things that the United States was supporting that then turned into this kind of information are really, there's a whole, we are building up our ecosystem to respond to this, but it's not just here in the United States, it's also global. It's happening everywhere.
Jacqueline?
Just quickly, I wanted to build on that because Kelly's use of nexus and networks reminded me that the actual term that the Chinese use for these facilities is not actually police station, it's overseas service center, serving the Ministry of Public Security, which is being internationalized to extend the long arm of Beijing's intelligence and repressive apparatus all over the world. And so the first victims, of course, are overseas Chinese people, but this is having an influence on freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, American freedoms in the United States, in Europe, as Kelly was saying. So we actually should be careful. We should be careful, I already indicated, in using the word friend, or when the Chinese Communist Party uses the word friend, they don't mean friend the way we mean it. And same thing with police station. It means serving the party, extending the intelligence and repressive apparatus's long arm into our cities and towns and states, and obviously that's unacceptable.
So perhaps by way of explaining an evolution very briefly, there was a case when I was in the legislature that a Tibet Day resolution came up. It was watered down by the majority Democrats and passed. It was more or less along the lines of similar language that, in fact, Nancy Pelosi had backed and successfully passed in the federal Congress. The next year, the author, Sam Blakesley, an old colleague of mine, tried again, and he wanted the original, stronger language that mirrored what the federal government language was, passed under Nancy Pelosi. And this time, it was different. This time, what ended up happening is that the Chinese Foreign Ministry dispatched pretty much everybody from the consulates in both San Francisco and Los Angeles and did a full court press into the legislature, offering trips to Shanghai, Beijing, Hong Kong, the nice parties in San Francisco, potential donations from people who were, people who had businesses. It was bad enough that the FBI visited me and asked if I had been visited. And I just kind of laughed and I said, I don't think you know my background and that I don't think they'd waste their time. And then the officer told me that the FBI had reason to believe that I was being monitored by the Chinese. Okay, that's great. The bill was killed. Well, fast forward a few years, California had a law in its constitution that prevented discrimination based on ethnicity, race, gender in both state contracts as well as admissions to the UC and Cal State system. Now, both systems had their ways of kind of maneuvering around it, but in the school that was the number one employer in my old district, UC Irvine, about half the student body was Asian, the majority or plurality of which was from mainland China. The local joke was that UCI stood for the University of Chinese Immigrants. And what was interesting was that an effort by the far left came up to remove this constitutional prohibition on discrimination because you wanted more people who were more diverse in the college system. Well, it was fascinating because they were doing it through legislature, right? And it was getting ready to pass. And then all of a sudden, you started to see this lobbying effort that was very different from the effort that we saw on the Tibet Day. It was grassroots Chinese Americans who were complaining that if this passed, that it would be more difficult to get their children into school. Because just by way of numbers, there weren't enough white non-Hispanics anymore in the system to reduce to get more of the right mix, right? You'd have to have a serious reduction of Asian students. Here's the clincher, though. As I was reviewing the Chinese language ethnic press in California, I was then looking for similar sentences from the press in China that I could see online. And I found entire articles that originated in communist China in simplified Mandarin characters. I don't read, but I know how to do pattern recognition, right? And then the same exact article would appear in the Chinese language press in California saying that this was discriminatory, it would ruin the ability of your children to get into school. What was really happening, though, was that China steals so much of our intellectual property by placing their students in our research institutions who then steal the IP and go back home. And they knew that if this law passed, it would ruin their ability to do that. And so just in the span of 5 years, you saw this massive shift. So this would have been from 2008-9 to 2013, right, which is the date that you talk about with Xi Jinping, right, who was like re-emphasizing. So that's fascinating because they turned on a network that did not exist a few years earlier in California.
Yeah, I mean, I actually was working with the Tibetans at the time that all of that happened. And so I remember all of that very clearly and watching things shift even at that time and noting how California is often a bellwether, and noting at that time and pointing out to my Tibetan friends that I was working with that, like, you've got a real problem here, and you need to, because I think they had coasted thinking, we've got a great network, we've got huge support in California, we've got, Nancy Pelosi, we've got all these other people, Dianne Feinstein, who are big supporters of our, I'm like, you've got a red flag here, you need to pay attention to this. I also want to, another thing that that I think is very important is Chinese language media in the United States and around the world has been largely taken over by the party. It used to be independent. It used to be community supported, but now they have managed to put a stranglehold on advertising. They monitor it very, very closely. They recognize it as a key tool for managing the public opinion within Chinese diasporas. And so all over the world, in every country, no matter how big or small, the party has made sure to dominate local Chinese media sources and make sure that they get all of their news, like they don't use AP or UPI, they use Xinhua. They use a direct feed from the state-controlled media, the party state-controlled media in China as their main editorial source for information for both straight news, which is obviously not straight news because it's the party state's mouthpiece, as well as editorial. And so you've seen this real just complete washing out of any independent editorial in any Chinese language newspaper or any kind of Chinese language media outlet all around the world.
Jacqueline,
it's a huge problem.
Did you want to address at all let me just directly ask you, there was a law that was changed in China within the last 5 or 6 years that obligates Chinese citizens to perform for the government whenever requested. What's that all about, and is that a threat? What is that?
Yes, thank you. The National Security Law of 2017 formalizes the claim of the party to any data that can be accessed by an entity, a Chinese entity. So whether that's a nominally private sector, I say nominally because there are CCP cells even in private sector businesses in China, or an individual, the CCP, the intelligence services, has the ability, this law says, to get that information if it's accessible to the Chinese entity. And it stipulates that the Chinese entity, again, whether it's a business or an individual, has to deny that the request was made. So
wait a minute, or an individual, you're saying?
Yes, yes.
So if you're, let's just get this straight. And by the way, I mean, this is very important to understand just from the standpoint of understanding what we're up against here, because you'll hear the term, this is racist, used as a defensive shield. So I want to make it very clear. There are individuals who are in our nation now, some of whom are dual citizen, which, by the way, our government does not officially recognize dual citizenship. There is no such thing. You can't be.
And the Chinese Communist Party does not allow
right,
it either.
Right. So you can't be loyal to 2 different countries at the same time. That's not a thing. So that said, if you're here on a green card or here on an educational visa, what exactly does that law mean, and how does the government of China enforce it?
That's a great question. Just yesterday, some of you may have seen the Stanford Review, stanfordreview.org, put out a piece that was written by students about the amount of espionage that's taking place, coercion and intimidation and espionage on Stanford's campus, and apparently this has been going on for many years now. And the reason that they brought it to light was they had enough indications from the ground up of students being threatened that they thought it was their duty to write about it, even though the administration of the school has been conspicuously silent on this issue. But the way it works, as documented in that article, on a campus, say, where there's a tremendous amount of research and development and intellectual property being created, and that is apparently a priority for the Chinese intelligence services. We're talking about Stanford here, but this applies equally well to UT Austin and Texas A&M and your fine institutions here. And it came up in the hearing. Is there, the consulates reach into the schools, they work through student groups, and then there's the Chinese Scholarship Council. 26,000 students from China in the United States, which actually is only a fraction of the total, are here as scholarship students through that program. And apparently, as documented in this story, they are obligated to sign a kind of oath of allegiance to the CCP and then meet regularly with handlers and deliver intellectual property that they have access to by virtue of being on the campuses that they are on in the United States. So they are regularly conduits for, again, the CCP's effort to kind of siphon off what's happening in our labs or what's happening in our schools. And the article said they're so interested in Stanford that they have to talk about the way the labs are organized and research protocols and how the messaging works and kind of real brass tack stuff in addition to the intellectual property. And this came up at the hearing the other day where our friend Mr. Chung testified, because he said, you don't have to worry that Chinese students in the United States, may be loyal to the Chinese Communist Party. After all, so many of them are scholarship students. They're not from connected elite families. They're not here because they can pay their way. They're here because they scored really well and they earned scholarships. And here we are reading that the Chinese Scholarship Council keeps very close tabs on those students who are maybe the most vulnerable. Maybe some of them just want to stay here, but they are beholden to Beijing because Beijing says so, and unfortunately, our FBI can't protect their families. And again, according to this article and other sources, if these students don't respond and turn over the intellectual property, they are going to be threatened. Their parents or their family members back in China will be threatened. And so they will find themselves between a rock and a hard place, to the point where it even raises a question about, is it moral or ethical for us to admit these students, knowing that they are going to be, if they're doing anything that's of interest to the party, put in that position and threatened?
Jimmy, I have a question for you when it comes to like the reception of the right of center universe in America, right? We have a lot of things that we pay attention to, different issues rise and fall in salience. Like, for example, it seems like nobody much cares about the border anymore because, we've gone from total chaos to more or less perfect control. But when it comes to this issue in particular, do you find, how do you seek to cover it? By that I mean, is there any interest, number one, and do you feel any need to be careful in how you cover it because of the potential claims, some of which may be true, some false, about, oh, this is just, national origin discrimination, or this is racism?
I think the interest ebbs and flows. I mean, obviously, as someone covering this topic, as someone who believes it's incredibly important, I wish there was more attention being shed on it, and people would click on these stories more, frankly. But no, I mean, it is incredibly important to be very, very careful about how you talk about these issues. You don't want to paint with too broad a brush. The way that I approach it is I often look at what Chinese state media is saying, and they're very transparent in some respects about who is meeting whom, who is showing up at certain events, because within the United Front system, you're going to get credit. It's an ecosystem where individual actors, individual entrepreneurs try to, climb the ladder, become more important, get invited to, the military parade in Beijing if you're a local, New Yorker or Californian who wants to get plugged into that, and you're part of the local, Chinese diaspora community. So you have these events, you talk about who shows up, and then you see, oh, the Chinese consul general was here, or oh, such and such local politician from the city council or the state legislature or Congress attended this event, and you can kind of go from there. And one thing that I've tried to do in my reporting is use public records laws. So at the state level, you have a lot of legislation, or a lot on the books, like the federal FOIA statute. So I can go to New York State and ask for emails related to, say, the governor's office's interactions with various Chinese organizations, or the mayor's office's emails with certain groups like the Chinese consulate. I think that there is a lot of spurious, like racism claim stuff going around. And I think the antidote to that is just to be very clear, very precise about which organizations you're talking to, how they are linked to certain other groups and to the party state, and not to overstate it. The truth is incredibly, incredibly noteworthy by itself. It's incredibly alarming. And if you just lay out the facts, I think the right sort of impact will follow that.
Michael, you've been active with State Armor in, 17, 18 states now? Have you encountered any specific instances where the things that you're working on, like the Pacific stress test legislation, or legislation to force a divestiture of pension funds from China, those sorts of things, have you encountered anything where you thought you were going to have success, and then all of a sudden you start to hit roadblocks and you realize that something's going on, or has it been the case you've mostly been in the low-hanging fruit where you're pretty sure you're going to win? What's going on there?
There's certainly a lot of low-hanging fruit, and we aggressively pursue those opportunities. But I think that your question points to a really important point, which is the resistance that we face when we face it is from the American business community. And in 2022, the Director of National Intelligence put out a memo describing this, saying that the Chinese Communist Party at the state and local level seeks to operate through the American business community. So sometimes they will be in those chambers of commerce and otherwise. I'll tell you, there's one state where we're actively pursuing pension divestment right now. It's not Texas. And we're being told that BlackRock is telling that state, we will cut you off entirely if you merely divest from China, right? So there's something going on here. Now, BlackRock has a long history of questionable behavior as it relates to the Chinese Communist Party. In 2021, they recommended investors triple or quadruple their exposure to China. Within months of that, they received market access to China. They were the first major American investment firm to get market access to China. So sometimes it's what I would kind of describe direct from these American business interests, but then sometimes it's kind of jostling about confusion. Sometimes we pursue legislation related to LiDAR, which is a laser detection technology related to drones, related to things that are going into cars that you do not want going into your car. And the American business community will, maybe be confused about what's going on there, or just not like it. One last thing I would say on state legislation: procurement is so important, and the Texas legislature is doing it. You all mentioned the 2017 National Intelligence Law, where data has to be turned over. Well, where is a data nexus point? Information technology companies. And so the largest provider of routers in the United States is a Chinese company that has been found in multiple investigations, including by Microsoft, federal agencies, to have backdoors in their product. This is going into state and local governments, this is going into small businesses, but that's just one piece. So any ICT, information communications technology, that's what they want to sell in at the state and local level, because then they're just reading your emails. Then they're able to forward stage for cyber attacks on other assets. And this is all documented that this is happening. And so they seek to exploit the seams between the federal government and the state government, where they hope that the states aren't as aware of these vulnerabilities. They seek to leverage, there's a Chinese computer company in the state of Texas that's trying to use a Texas business industry group to block a procurement bill because they want to keep selling those Chinese computers into the state of Texas. So there's a business group with American companies in it as well. They're always trying to operate through the American business community. Frankly, I love when the Communist Party company hires up a lobbyist in the state, and this has happened before. I love that. Okay, so now you're seeing what is really on the other side of this. It's a Chinese Communist Party military company involved in genocide. This is one example from Arizona. And people get a little bit spooked about that. That might fly in DC, that doesn't fly at the state level. So those types of companies, they seek to avoid direct conflict. They seek to operate through the American business community.
Jacqueline, let me ask before we go to questions, and start thinking of your questions now, so we have some really good ones from the audience. Jacqueline, where do we go from here? Right? If you look at what's happened in kind of this acceleration that we've seen over the last 12 years, you look at the current issue with the tariffs and what appears to be a Chinese economy in distress. How do you see things playing out over the next year or two when it comes to China's use of the United Front Work Department here in America?
Thank you for the question. I think they're going to double down because, as Michael said, they have identified the subnational or the state and local level as a kind of seam or gap in our armor. We're doing things at the federal level. We're designating certain military companies as no-go for the Pentagon or contractors, but states and local police forces are still free to procure from those entities. So it's a huge problem. But I think where we're going at the national level and at the state level, I mean, basically by virtue of common sense at the state and local level, and by virtue of the president's leadership and the administration's leadership at the national level, is, we're waking up, we're doing, my background is in military research, and unfortunately we're closer than we've been at any point in my career to a war in the Pacific or beyond the Pacific, I fear. And so, we've sort of been through this to the extent that we saw, there can be major powers like nuclear armed adversaries invading other countries around them. We saw that a few years ago in Europe with Russia and Ukraine. And I think we're staring down, the barrel of a potential conflict across the Taiwan Strait or in the South China Sea or any one of a number of disputed frontiers. And I think we're preparing. I think the president has us and the Treasury Secretary and the Commerce Secretary have us reversing a situation where we were too vulnerable, where we let ourselves become dependent on our number one geopolitical rival for basic inputs. And we're ending that now, and it can't happen too soon. And so I really appreciate this discussion, because part of waking up entails understanding what the United Front is doing, again, not just in DC, but also at the state and local level.
Perfect. Well, so here's how things are going to work. We have a microphone or two. So when I call on you, the microphone's going to come to you. I'd like you to say your name if you're with any group. And then, because it's a question, what you need to do is kind of keep it short and have that up inflection at the end. So we're not looking for speeches. That's our job up here, right? So who wants to ask a question now that I've scared you a bit? Okay, down here, we'll have the honor of the first question. So a lot of pressure on you, sir.
I'll try not to mess it up. My name is Michael Lovins. I'm not with any particular group because nobody will have me. But so the title of this is about the land grab. I'm curious, what sort of land is the CCP most interested in getting? Urban, rural, commercial, residential?
Great question.
So forth.
All right, I'll kick that off real quick, and then we'll let one of my colleagues add on to that. So a few years back, Xi Jinping was quite concerned about capital leaving China and about what are called, I think, naked officials, basically people who've managed to offshore a lot of their wealth to other countries and salt away their children or their spouse. And so you saw a lot of residential real estate being purchased. You saw commercial real estate and entertainment venues. That was prohibited. There was a decree that went out. You can't do that anymore. Not that it doesn't happen. Now, what they want to see purchased are ranches, farms, and food processing facilities. And what is further of interest is these are often, not always, but often co-located to significant U.S. military installations. And so then that opens up an interesting question when it comes to, are there other reasons why they're doing this other than their own food security, which of course throughout history has been one of the triggers of revolutions in China, is the lack of food. Does anyone have anything specific to add to that? Ambassador?
Yeah, this is actually a global phenomenon on the food security issue, where they are going around and purchasing farmland all over the world through front companies and shell companies. And so this is definitely a strategic thing. But if here in the United States, when you map the purchases, they overlay to strategic infrastructure in the United States. And it's not just military bases, it's also infrastructure choke points where they're buying land around a key rail junction where we move products across the country, or a key highway that the military would use to move troops from one location to another. So they have a very good map of the United States and what our strategic infrastructure is, what our critical infrastructure is, and they are very intentionally making purchases that correlate to that.
Wow, sounds like we've really hit a vein here. Good job on your question. So,
we had the pleasure of working with a gentleman named Brian Kavanaugh last year. He's now serving an incredible role with President Trump, and he would travel around to the States with us, and just through the happenstance of our work, it would come out that some Chinese company was trying to buy this thing in this location, and Brian would always get this look, because Brian's a guy who knows where things are that are really important. And he would say something like, that's the second most important rail line in the United States, and they're going to be literally on top of it. The company involved is Fufeng, which had previously been driven out of North Dakota because they tried to put up a grain silo next to Grand Forks Air Force Base. Secretary of the Air Force said, this is a hard no-go. He wrote a public letter. You could go find that letter. We were working in Indiana, and just by happenstance, we didn't know Fufeng was there. They were trying to do a deal with the state of Indiana. We found the location. Brian gets this look on his face, and we saw that all the time. Here in the state of Texas, there's the famous case near the border near Laughlin Air Force Base, 130,000 acre, 700 foot tall wind turbines, perfect surveillance tools. It's going into Germany in a similar way right now. I would flag another one that's, I think, live right now is a state-owned enterprise. Chinese state-owned enterprise is trying to buy out a French firm called Vencorex, I believe, which has a facility near Houston that is across the street from the largest petrochemical processing facility in the Western Hemisphere. So to the question of what, I think equally important to what, and Chuck already said this, is where. The where is always so obvious.
Jimmy, and then Jacqueline.
Yeah, 2 points to add. The first one is really quick. There's an organization called the Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries. It was cited.
Oh, that doesn't sound spooky at all.
No, not spooky at all. They just want to be friends. But this intelligence document, this bulletin that Michael talked about, the intelligence community flagged it as a United Front linked organization that basically runs all the sister city relationships between Chinese cities and U.S. cities. And on the U.S. side, it's all about friendship, right? On the Chinese side, there's obviously a geopolitical purpose to it. One thing that I reported about this organization is that they have been involved in economic and industrial espionage activities, and I'll leave it at that. But the second point is that you look at what United Front actors have done in the recent past. When Xi Jinping visited San Francisco for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in 2023, there were massive groups of pro-Beijing demonstrators who showed up with banners. It was reported that the consulate helped organize people coming in from all over the country, from Southern California, but also from New York, from Utah, from everywhere. So the Chinese diplomatic corps helped mobilize people, get them out here, in addition to overseas Chinese community leaders who are linked to United Front organizations. There was violence on the streets of an American city. They beat up, protesters who were Uyghurs, who were Hong Kongers, and other Chinese dissidents. And so far, I don't believe that there have been any indictments specifically related to people who were on the ground there who took part in these assaults. But I guess the question is, if you extrapolate that out to a scenario in which there is, God forbid, a conflict between the U.S. and China, United Front actors, the Chinese Foreign Ministry, they have the ability to mobilize people, and they've demonstrated that before. What does that look like in terms of the potential for sabotage and other sorts of malign activities?
Jacqueline?
Yeah, I'd just like to build on what's already been said, because it does seem as though there's a pattern of preparing for war or preparing to threaten us. And in Michael's example, you heard about Fufeng moving from North Dakota to Indiana. The other example that he raised about the chemical facility, it's a state-owned enterprise called Wanhua. I think it's trying to do this development in Freeport, but it previously was evicted essentially from Louisiana, where it was previously trying to do a big chemical plant, both for environmental but also national security concerns reasons. So these actors that seem to be linked to the CCP or state-owned enterprises and clearly linked are coming in, and they're not taking no for an answer in one place, they're moving to another place. And there's a complement to what's going on with the physical, the land purchases or the facility construction, and that is the cyber part, where, and this is where the procurement issue becomes so important. We have to both block physical threats and cyber threats and collection of data and positioning of malware through these routers and modems and cloud computing and all these internet-connected devices. And we learned about this through the Volt Typhoon hack, which Microsoft disclosed, and then the last administration disclosed, where there was a warning that came out. And I don't know that enough people sort of heard it, which was, Chinese Communist Party-linked actors are positioning in our grid, in our critical infrastructure, our water treatment facilities, our waste plants, our electricity facilities in Guam that would clearly be relevant to a mobilization for a conflict. So they're doing it both physically and by cyber means virtually, and that's why we need to deal with it both in terms of land proximate to critical infrastructure and military bases and the procurement side.
A question down here, and then after that, okay, whatever, we'll do it in reverse. Next question down here. Sorry about that.
Andre Brunel, thanks for a great presentation. I'm here in my individual capacity. I work at a law firm. I wanted just to have a little bit more of a discussion about what would happen if tomorrow Xi decides today's the day and the blockade or the invasion of Taiwan happens. What happens? What can we expect from the United Front? And Jimmy mentioned mobilization, but I'm sure there's more. So I'd like to hear what that more is.
Yeah, that's like okay, so just to restate it for everyone, if the balloon were to go up tomorrow and China would seek to forcibly take over Taiwan, what might happen here? I've often thought that the Chinese Foreign Ministry cannot guarantee that they can keep America and Japan and potentially the Philippines out of the conflict. And so if you can't guarantee that we will stand by and just let this happen, what would they do? So setting aside the military aspects, which might be pretty significant, here at home, I think they would try to do things to either A, dissuade America from leaning into it significantly, so do something so that politically there'd be pressure not to do something, as well as conduct actual damage to things like our communications infrastructure, our electrical infrastructure, potentially assassinating key individuals. You already heard water treatment facilities. You can't live very long without water, especially if you're in a hot climate like in Texas. And so I think another aspect of this that people are concerned about is during the loss of control of the U.S. Border with Mexico, we saw a phase shift of the type of individuals coming into the country from China at the beginning of 2023, where it went from family units to mostly single males of military age, some 20 to 30,000 or so that came across in that time period. We know a lot of them are working at illegal marijuana grows across the country that are controlled by the Chinese criminal organized crime, which in turn answer to the Chinese Communist Party. So how many of those individuals are simply hapless individuals that had their passport taken and are kind of modern day slaves? Or are they commandos? No one really knows, because in the past, Border Patrol would have interviewed them, or Customs would have interviewed them, Customs and Immigration, right? But because the border was lost control of, there was basically none of these interviews that took place. So we really don't know. But with that as a happy thought, perhaps anything that I missed that you wish to, one last thing. Your medicines will be in scarce supply, and will probably suffer at least 10 times the civilian casualties from lack of antibiotics and other key medicines as we would in the military with military losses. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think that you've given the broad strokes, but I think we have to, the doctrine of the PLA is to win without fighting. And they want to take us off the board completely. Their goal is for us to not engage and not help defend Taiwan and not help defend our allies and discourage Japan or the Philippines from getting involved because we're not there. And so they will, I think creating chaos and havoc will be the first goal, to start messing around with the water supply, the electrical grid. One of the things, it's not just about not having water to drink, it's how do you cool nuclear reactors? You need water to do that. You have here in the Southwest, you have a lot of nuclear power. In Arizona, for instance, right there near the border, a large nuclear reactor. If you can't get water to that nuclear reactor, what happens? That's true across the country. So these are the kinds of nodes that they have identified. They know where our vulnerabilities are, and they are poised to take advantage of them. Getting into the communication system, as Jackie noted, is critical for them to be able to monitor and see what we're doing, and then cut off communications and cut off our strategic communications. So they have, have impregnated at all the key nodes. For us to get them out is a massive project that we have only just begun to undertake.
Right.
And it's going to take a whole of society effort, and it's going to take a whole of government effort at the state, local, and national
All
level.
right, bullet points only. I think we're only down to a minute. I really apologize to the audience, but this has been too good. So anything we missed?
I think the most important thing a state can do is what we call Pacific Conflict Stress Test to get ready for that day. And I would pitch to consider President Trump's tariffs as a global Pacific conflict stress test. He is building resilience by forcing that cutoff. The supply chains start moving now. They start moving April 2. And that will remove leverage from China in that conflict. That's how I see 145%. It's a global Pacific conflict stress test.
Jacqueline, Jimmy, anything we missed?
Yeah, I'd say when it comes to United Front targets in terms of politicians, it's everyone. It's people of all ideologies. It's the far left. It's centrist Democrats. It's Republicans too. I've seen that in New York, where there's a Republican state lawmaker delegation that visited China with someone who is very closely tied to United Front organizations about a year ago. It's across the political spectrum. It's city council all the way up, it's something that more people need to know about and understand.
And just because the question was asked by a legal professional, I'll just mention that it will be the PLA in part doing this work of disintegrating us and weakening our morale. They have a doctrine called 3 warfares, which involves media, psychological, and legal operations. And so we need to be aware that they will be operating on the ground here to sow dissension and confuse people about what's really happening and who's started it and what's at stake. And they will be preparing the battlefield in advance. And we may lack imagination because we're used to using our military either for conventional, maybe sometimes subconventional in terror context, or nuclear deterrence missions. We don't think about our military as being engaged at that level in shaping and misinformation.
Well, I'm really sorry to say that we've reached the top of the hour. I'm sure I shouldn't say this necessarily because I can't vouch for my colleagues, but I'm pretty sure most of them are going to be willing to stay around for a few minutes afterwards to answer any additional questions that you may have. I know that there are additional questions out there. Thank you so much for attending this very important panel, and thank you to those online that are watching as well. Have a good afternoon.